All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College Application and Website Development, or AWD1111, database-driven web development class, I have been doing a series of video presentations, most of which have been based on the Valley of Code, which are a series of handbooks that are provided by Mr. Flavio Copes. So I've done several on his HTML, CSS, and JavaScript handbooks. I also added some of my own stuff on JavaScript basics from the AWD1000 class, and I also gave a bunch of presentations that were based off of Brad Traversy's Web Dev Guide. But as of now, I have come through here. Let me grab that again. And I have done Mr. Copes' HTML handbook, CSS handbook, and JavaScript handbook, and Mr. Traversy's work. So I'm in the Node handbook, and you can see I'm on page 126 of 161, but I am in the Node.js handbook. Now there's a couple pages in here that I've skipped that I'm going to end up going back over in just a bit. All right, so when you look in here, it says the Node OS module provides many functions that you can use to retrieve information from the underlying operating system. So if you have to know, for example, are you running on a Windows platform, on a Linux platform, on a Mac platform, or whatever. And they give you some examples right here. I'm not going to run through these. It says, let's take a look at some of the main methods that are provided here. All right. Arch is short for architecture, so if you wanted to know if they're using a 64-bit system, 32-bit, etc. CPUs, as it says, it'll give you information on the CPU that's being used in the system. Free mem, this one can be kind of important. All right, as it says, it returns the number of bytes that represent the free memory in the system. So in other words, how much memory do you have available? Home dir for the home directory, host name, should be hopefully very obvious, load AVG, network interfaces, and there's a lot of other ones too. I'm not going to run through all of these. Platform can be important just for what you see right here. Release, would that be important? Again, it depends. I remember when Windows 10 came out, it seemed to be a big change from what we'd had earlier. And I've not even done anything with Windows 11, but from what I've heard, there are changes in there as well. Temp directory, total memory, the type that you're using, again, we talked about this. The number of seconds the computer has been running since it was last rebooted, user information, okay? And again, most of that stuff hopefully is pretty self-evident when you take a look at it. But again, if we come back here and we jump back into here, we go to OS, this is all the stuff that's in there. Now, it doesn't look like there's a lot, all right? But if you peruse your way through here, there are better examples probably than, and I should say more examples than I think Mr. Cope showed in those past few pages. All right, so let's talk about the events module. Before we do that, because like I said, I'm jumping around a little bit, and I get that. But I'm going to go back over about 2 or 3 pages and talk here about this node event emitter. I call it the emitter. I've heard it called the emitter. All right, but it says if you've worked with JavaScript in the browser, you know that much of the interaction is handled through events. In particular, clicking a button, all right, clicking the mouse, pressing a key, or etc. On the back-end side, it says Node offers us the option to do something in a similar way using the events module. So again, if I take a second here and I jump back into here, notice there's events. All right. And you can see it's, again, a quite extensive list. So it says this module in particular offers the event emitter or event emitter class, which you use to handle events. Okay. So you can see how it's initialized, and then much like when you work with Express, you give it a name and then you create a new instance of it. This object, as it says, exposes, among many other things, on methods and emit methods. Emit methods will actually trigger an event. On, as it says, will allow you to add a callback to something that's going to be executed when the event is indeed triggered. So they give an example right here. And this example says, let's create a start event. And as a matter of providing a sample, we react to that by just logging to the console. So when that happens, do this. When we run the emitter, the event handler function is triggered, and then the console log will show. You can pass arguments to this, be it one argument or multiple arguments. And as mentioned right there, the event emitter or event emitter also exposes several other methods to interact with events. Once for a one-time listener, a lot like a set timeout type of thing, which happens a lot. A remove listener, which is kind of like a clear timeout, I guess, and a remove all listeners. And again, there's a link right there if you want more. Now, I've already gone over the file stuff, and I've already gone over the operating system stuff. I know I'm just whipping through this very quickly because we've already done this. We did the OS stuff, which was very short. All right, so that'll bring us here, which is, come on, the Node Events module. As it says here, so this is why I wanted to go through that little section on the event emitter before we go through this section. But as it says here, the events module provides us with the event emitter class, which is the key to working with events. We already saw this. All right, and as it says there, the event listener has certain built-in events. It has new listener when a new listener or when a listener has been added, and remove when it's been removed. So just like they did for the OS stuff, there's a very limited little description right here. So what I'm telling you is, again, you can go back to here and we can look under events. And if you want, for example, if I want to know how the emitter.setMaxListener works, I click on here and there may or there may not be an example. But regardless, the syntax will be in there, the return type, and a description of what's going on in there. So again, much more extensive than what Mr. Copes has here. So I'm just going to buzz through this very quickly. All right, I think, let's see where I am for time. I'm only at 9 minutes, so I'm going to go in here and talk about the HTTP module. You have seen some of this stuff earlier. And again, sorry if I keep sounding like a broken record, but the HTTP module is another one of these that was built in, and it's part of the Node API. So if I come here and I choose HTTP, there it is. And you'll notice this is very, very extensive. So that's typically how you include it. And I know I've said this before, but I want to say it again, and that is, it's kind of convention that at least most of the time, when you are requiring something, the name that you give it, you make it a constant, and you give it the same name as what you're including. But there is by no means is there anything that says you have to do it that way. Again, that's kind of just, for lack of better words, that's kind of the standard for doing it. But if you decide you don't want to do it that way, you don't have to. All right. It says http.methods lists all the HTTP methods that are supported. You can see what a big list that is. The status codes we've talked about before. Again, remember that by and large, the 200 codes are good. The 100 codes are informational. The 300 codes are also, they're typically like redirections. The 400 code means that it's an error on the end user part. A 500 code means that it's an error on the server side. All right, but if you want an extensive listing, there it is under http.status codes. Global agent, as it says, points to the global existence of the agent object, which they'll talk about in a little bit. We've already used the create server. All right. Now remember, that's more an archaic way of doing it as opposed to doing it using Express. Okay. We've talked about the request object. We've talked about the response object. An HTTP request, as it says, makes a hypertext transfer protocol request to a server. The GET is similar to request, but automatically sets the HTTP method to GET. Notice here, as it says, that the HTTP module provides 5 different classes. We'll talk about all of them in turn in just a moment, but they are agent, client request, server, server response, and incoming message. So let's take a few minutes and go over these. With the agent, as it says right there, Node.js creates a global instance of the HTTP.agent class to manage connection persistence. All right. All right. It also maintains a pool of sockets. Okay. Now, the client request, as it says, it's created when the request or the GET is called. When a response is received, the response event is called with the response. The return data, as it says, can be read in 2 ways, with a response.read, all right, or in the response event handler. The http.server we've looked at before. As it says, it can be used to instantiate and return when creating a new server. The server response, all right. So again, we already looked at the request. This is the response. So this is what you ask. That's what gets returned. This method, as it says here, the method you'll always call here is end, and end will close the response. There's different ways you can do this. We'll look at a lot of this stuff when we go through here and start going into this in more detail. It says these methods are used to interact with HTTP headers. Notice there's GET, etc. There's a whole bunch of these. After processing headers, and what are headers? They've got additional information in there that you may need to use. All right. To send data to the client in the body, you use write. There's a lot of different things that you can do in here, and there's a lot of different ways that this can be done. An incoming message object, as they say, is created by HTTP server or client request, and it'll do very similar things. All right. All right, even though it, let's see how long this particular section is on streams. All right, this is a little bit extensive, so I think that rather than putting this in the lesson that I'm currently in, all right, I'm going to stop right here, pick it up talking about Node.js streams in the next lecture.